One, two, three.
Welcome to the Smartest Amazon Seller Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Needham, and going through, for people that have been listening to every episode, I've reduced the number of guests to make sure that the quality is just super high. Or really, it's just so that the conversation moves forward. This guest has a unique perspective that I have not spoken with or seen. And, when it comes to thinking strategy from a brand's perspective, maybe a brand that isn't Amazon first. Also, this guest is an ex-Amazon employee. So, we kind of get a lot of things here. I want to welcome Kara from High Tide Commerce. She is now helping brands with the experience that she's had. And I'm excited to dive in to talk about, how a brand can flip over its strategies. So, Kara, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. I'm really excited to be here.
So, ex-Amazon, tell us a little about your venture in e-commerce and some of the brands you embedded with since then, and kind of what it's like to be an actual, the truth is most of the people that listen to this podcast, I think are, they probably identify as sellers, but everywhere in between, a lot of agencies, the audience is very diverse. And this is my opinion. Maybe it's just me. I don't think a lot of people know how brands work on the inside that see Amazon as a channel.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my e-commerce journey started at Amazon, as you mentioned, and I was lucky to be there back in the day before there was a lot of these kind of AI tools and fancy things. So while it was painful, I got to really dig into the basic core architecture of what is Amazon. And if you think about it, Amazon's influence in the marketplace, that means the core architecture of what makes e-commerce work. So that was just invaluable. I managed vendors there, ran through annual vendor negotiations. I was part of the ice machine process where smaller vendors will get automated emails going through negotiations. So I've
never heard of that. What's the ice machine?
It's what they called at Amazon internally. And basically, if you're not a big enough vendor, if you're not the top 3 vendors, you're not going to talk to an actual vendor manager to do your negotiations. You're going to get, at least at the time, it was junior people sending out asks and then telling people this is it, you take it or leave it. I think now they maybe offshored it a little bit, but I had something
how many vendors would a manager manage?
Yeah, so when I was a vendor manager, I had over 3,000. And the top 3 had not only me to talk to, but they also had kind of brand advocates. We call them SVS, Strategic Vendor Services. Now they're called ABS. They've gone through a lot. But you pay 1% or $1 million to get that. Otherwise, you work with RBS, which is this equivalent of seller support, right? An offshore team. So it's challenging.
If you're managing 3,000, I looked at the data. Some of those at the bottom have to be really small.
They're tiny. And actually, if you see the news, there's more and more of these smaller vendors that are getting kicked off the platform. Yeah. But it's not just that they're small. Some of the smaller ones are staying on, but it's this kind of complex mix of size of business,
growth,
operational efficiency, and also what does the brand bring to the platform? Is it the only brand that competes with a big Procter & Gamble product, right? What kind of additional value do they add? If you're just a vendor that sells the same thing as everybody else and it's big and bulky, get ready to probably get delisted if you haven't already.
Yeah. Okay. That's more inside information than I've ever heard.
Well, yeah. So, the great thing, about Amazon is understanding how to make it work, what doesn't work for it. Because then that also gave me a unique perspective when I went over to the brand and manufacturer side through things like annual vendor negotiations to know, hey, this is what Amazon wants. This is what we have to dangle in terms of a carrot. This is what we have to use for a stick. And, I have experience working in organizations large and small. So, one of the first stints I had out of Amazon was at a company called Signify, now known as Philips, or was known as Philips Lighting. So an $8 billion professional lighting organization. I came on to help build the e-commerce team for them. So it was very much coming into like a B2B brick and mortar focused org and then helping them kind of understand what e-commerce was. Like I remember the first content I was handed was like, hey, here's our like flyer image for in-store. Like here's to go make your Amazon content with this. So over the 6 years I was there, I built a whole global e-commerce playbook, trying to bring all markets aligned and also just educate about how to go about e-commerce from an Amazonian perspective.
Yeah. This is like kind of unrelated, but related. I came across an air filter brand that had about 1,000 ASINs on Amazon, and every single one of those ASINs, there are a lot of variants, like air filters or just something, and they had custom images across the board. I was like, whoever did this, wow, like that is a Herculean effort. But like you're on the opposite end of that, where like you're starting from scratch, and like, did they respond well? Do they kind of get it? They're like, oh, we actually need to do more here.
For the most part, it took a long period of negotiation. And I think anyone who's worked in a large enterprise can understand the pain of cross-functional, internal influence negotiation. Like some of the recommendations I made 5 years ago are just now being implemented, for example. So I think that's where, agencies, for example, trip up, is because they don't necessarily understand, unless they've worked in them, how an enterprise works. Like, who are the decision makers? Who do you need to talk to? What are they concerned about? What are their timelines? So I think, like, how does their procurement process work? Ours was a nightmare. So it's, it's interesting to have that perspective, because, after the fact, I also, went on to manage more. Like when I was at Signify, I expanded my scope of responsibility to also manage all brand media. So I think that's where people also, when they're thinking about how to structure their organization, is they think, okay, there's Amazon and Amazon media, and then there's retail media like Walmart and those guys, and then there's brand media over here. But really, in reality, they're so interconnected. And what you do off Amazon has a huge impact on Amazon, right? So we've seen, like with TikTok, the trends of something would go viral on TikTok and then, sales blow up on Amazon.
Yeah.
When I was there, actually, it was when George Takei was talking about, like, he did this post on this product that was like a coffee mug that looked like a prescription bottle. And this was back in 2015. And the vendor manager who was over that product was like, oh my gosh, this is like a 10,000% spike in a day. Like, what happened? And he actually, for our weekly business review, had to like speak to that call out. And he was like, it was featured on Instagram by George Takei. Like, there's no way to plan for that, but it had just massive influence. And that product stayed pretty high up for months afterwards because of all the kind of downstream effects of having that a level of traffic and visibility.
Yeah, no, totally. So, well, take us forward to, that's like an old, brand. And then, what were the next stages? Or, because eventually you got an experience enough that like, you're like, okay, this is kind of the strategy I would, implement.
Yeah, I'm going to say one of the reasons I decided to start up my own boutique shop is because I had implemented these processes and strategies at organizations that I saw worked really well if they were actually executed. And I said, okay, well, I can bring all these to work with my clients and help them put together like the processes. So keeping in mind, the Amazon leadership principles, optimization and process improvement, like all the good stuff that I had accumulated over the years, bring it to help other brands, sellers grow. I think also the thing I noticed too is being an internal person embedded in an organization, it can be really hard to be a change maker. But someone coming in from the outside, it's just, I don't know if it's psychology or what, but like you can just enact change so much faster. I think also the brands who recognize that they don't know everything and that they might need an outside consult. It doesn't mean there's the person's going to come in and fire a whole team. It just means like you might need a little bit of help. And the benefit of being a sole agent is I spend a lot of my time like researching and learning, so I can help brands understand, like, are they in the right channel? Is Amazon, for example, the right channel for them next? Should they even talk to Target? What are they doing on their, like, what's their social strategy? And, what software are they using? Do they have too many software? Like Like how, from an outsider's perspective, like how can you help them standardize what they're doing and kind of bring it up to the next level?
You mentioned that, like, you worked with, like, you're in a position where you're hiring or working with agencies and managing them. What was that like? I mean, because now, I mean, I see, these PPC agencies, there's a lot, and they're very, they project big, and, but inside of a brand, that's different.
Yeah. The sad thing, the funny thing is, it's often like if you get one person in an organization who likes you, they will go ahead and champion you. Like when I was at Signify, like the agencies I would bring in, I'd be the one championing them. I would be the one negotiating for that budget. I would be the one asking them like, hey, give me the data to show how you're going to impact us. But if you don't have that, if you don't have someone championing you, it can be really tough because a lot of at least larger enterprises are in a position where their procurement model is so challenging. And by that, I mean, if I want to change from agency A to a different agency, agency A, they're not bad, they're not amazing, but I don't want to do it because in order to change, I have to go through a RFP process, so a request for proposal. I have to challenge and legitimize the budget again because I've brought it up to the attention that I'm spending on this. So I have to say again why I'm spending on it and speak to previous results. And then I have to go to it through sometimes an arduous procurement process where I've shown, hey, I've gotten proposals and pitches from all these other ones, and procurement's going to need to go and get proposals and pitches. And so it can take like 6 months at the worst for the really big guys. So sometimes it's kind of like, this agency or whoever we're working with, they're not the best, but they're not the worst. Is the juice worth the squeeze to fire them and go find somebody else?
Mm-hmm. What do you think were the most valuable types of agencies that you've worked with? Like that kind of just, solved a problem that you were like, I needed that help.
For me, it was the visibility. So agencies who could provide me visibility outside of my own brand, right? So like market share, the ones that like, Smart Scout, you guys do this, Stackline does this, showing me 1P, 3P. We use that a lot.
Okay.
Because as a 1P brand, we are being asked by leadership, why are your sales declining so much? And we'd say, actually, our brand sales in total on platform are doing quite well. But because of our poor channel hygiene, we're using 30 to 40% of our sales to unauthorized sellers. And that helped us go in, because once you put a dollar value to something, you can actually get something done.
Yeah, I heard Philips and I was like, that sounds like a brand that resellers would have been all over.
Oh, Philips Hue, we had a horrible, horrible experience with resellers, but we went through the really painful process of putting in authorized reseller contracts, going through and putting ones that weren't going to kind of comply on notice. But that's also really tough for a company that has traditional roots in B2B because some of their distribution contracts have been going on for decades. And now we're coming in telling them, hey, these big clients who are really good for you, they're actually just good because they're reselling on Amazon. Can you go tell them to stop? And they're like, I don't want to look, because that's going to hit their number, right? Yeah. So it's really tough to manage the various kind of needs and demands within an organization. And that's often why they move slower and why I think we're seeing a lot of these smaller incumbent brand or these smaller fighter brands coming in and dominating over incumbents.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's also where sellers have opportunity.
Right. You do have to be nimble. Like as you were just describing your experience, I'm like, nothing about that sounds nimble. Not like you kind of have to be right now if you are, surviving on Amazon with all the competition that's like just keeps coming. So now let's just say, there are some brands that still kind of need to like get kicked into gear. 2025, they've never taken things seriously, or maybe they put their foot off the gas and they need to like do something. What's some recommendations that you come in and you're seeing that helps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I structure kind of the framework of how I look at things around the Amazon flywheel, which we all know, right? Selection, price, convenience. So, but the way I expand this, it's more of a way to organize my own thinking because there's just like a million things you could go do. But for example, selection. I dig in and I see, okay, what percentage of your total selection is on Amazon? Let's say that they're an Amazon brand that's kind of stalling. What percentage is on Amazon? Okay, let's dig into the SKU level profitability. Let's see what percentage are driving these SKUs. For example, I had SKUs at one point that were costing me more than I was making because of compliance issues, because their packaging was non-compliant. So it's like you have to get into the details of Amazon, digging into each individual SKU.
What do you mean non-compliant?
Oh, yeah. So Amazon, at the time and now requires like ships in own container, right? Or for frustration-free packaging. So these products were requiring an additional overwrap, which yielded a concession, like a fine per item, right? Yeah. And then that's also a good way to see like, hey, are they only selling singles? Do they have any multi-packs? Do they have any bundles? Something sellers have access to, which is nice, more of like a better virtual bundle experience, right? So that's kind of where I start with selection, really digging into the SKUs, the assortment strategy. I mean, there's also taking a look, okay, of what you have on Amazon, do you have the exact same SKUs on other channels? Because, I look for kind of key red flags. And one of them is looking like on Smart Scout, what percentage of sales is actually going to the brand? If it's pretty low and there's other resellers, I know that there's bodies buried there, right? And then, looking at price, looking at like your competitors, what they are pricing at, what are your price trends have been, I've noticed some brands don't even have like a 12-month price promotional strategy. Sometimes they like kind of make it up on the fly. I know there's kind of some debate amongst the seller gurus around like constantly doing price matching and constantly thinking that way. That's not necessarily a strategy I start with or look at. Initially, I kind of want to look at the landscape and see like you as the product you are you competitive from a price perspective? Because if you're not, you better have like the value brought into the item in other ways to get people to want to buy it. Convenience, I look at like, what is your in-stock percentage? Are you, running out of stock consistently? Are you overstock? Like, do you have forecasts? Because that tells me like you have a deeper forecasting issue, possibly. That's kind of the framework I put to look at where the bodies are buried or where there might be things or issues. Mm-hmm. And so but that's, I think the challenge with Amazon is there's like so many things that can happen and be wrong. Go ahead.
If someone is like, like you said, they have like bodies buried and like, you're not going to go and fix every single problem. And you're like, you just kind of need a team. What are like key hires that you think about that like brands need?
Yeah. So it's obviously very like specific, but I think I like to keep smaller teams and then look at where it all depends on the brand situation. But say, for example, a brand has limited budgets. They have a highly complex portfolio. They have like one person managing Amazon and they can allocate more. Excuse me. Then you can look at potentially offshoring some of that, like just tactical work with like submitting content changes, submitting cases to, there's companies like one that's called Ecomwalla, and Aaron Hughes runs that. He's a US based guy, he's American, but he lives in India. And I find that can be really helpful to have that for sellers because I think you pay a subscription fee and you can get up to like 80 hours a week. That could be helpful. I think, for bigger brands, it's important to take a step back and look at how you are building your brand strategy and your growth strategy. What I mean by that is, if you haven't read the book Outcomes versus Outputs by Joseph Seedman, I think we can put the link in. I highly recommend because a lot of times what will happen is brands will say, okay, we want to grow our sales. And then, that's like an output, right? An outcome is saying we want to grow our consumer base and increase our lifetime value of our consumers, right? So then you can take each of those outputs and say, okay, in order to do this, I need to do these different activities. And then you can assign like teams to those different activities and those different outcomes. Because a lot of times what happens, you'll have a product team, marketing team, sales team, and they're not connected to each other. But when you think about the customer journey, these days, right? It's all connected. So there's not one place a customer looks for a product that doesn't connect to something like Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of get that, but help me like paint the picture of like how could those teams work together that like actually drives like on lifetime value? Is it just you know that they call matches or
Yeah, I think the crucial piece I found just from my experience working in these organizations is you need to make sure that all the teams are connected in a way early enough in the process. But what I mean is, if you're starting with the product team, putting together an MVP, they need to understand the needs of the Amazon team. Otherwise, they're going to bring product to market that doesn't work for e-commerce. So I think it's like when you have the connections across teams, it's important, and it sounds obvious, but a lot of these places are fairly siloed. So one of the models I was looking at that I thought was interesting is when you have like a digital, like a customer acquisition team. And within that customer acquisition team or like group task force, you have someone from sales, someone from marketing, someone from product, someone from user experience, and they're all working and figuring out the levers that are needed with customer acquisition. So the marketing person is like, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z on TikTok. And the Amazon person is going to say, okay, I'm going to make sure that our products are all ready to go, that you're featuring on TikTok to be able to benefit from that traffic. And then the D2C person is going to say, okay, I'm going to put a label in the packages saying visit our D2C site at when they receive the product from Amazon, and then get them into our CRM. So it's like these things are so interconnected, but it can be tough to break those traditional silos.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I've never successfully managed multiple channels. I've dabbled with a few and talked to professionals from either, but so some of those you almost have to be in the trenches to like see the conflicts across these channels.
Yeah.
Before you're like, oh no, there's a cleaner way.
Well, and I think too, for brands that are like have Amazon and have other channels, or have Amazon or look at other channels, I sound like kind of a Amazon nerd when I say plan Amazon first and make sure your Amazon strategy, everyone's in line and understands it, because Amazon can affect every other aspect of your business. And for example, Amazon does really, really well. They exceed their product allocation, and then Home Depot runs out of stock and they're pissed. And the team at Home Depot is pissed because they had an in-store reset coming up and now don't have product to fulfill it. Or, the Amazon team is going to run a promotion or launch a product that's a little too similar to what Costco has. And the Costco team realizes too late that now their member value per product is decreasing because Amazon ran a discount on a particular item. So people say well, everything's not about Amazon, but Amazon is like the canary in the coal mine, as well as like the the troublesome toddler. It'll go out and bash around and cause problems, but it'll also indicate where problems might lie in other channels.
Yeah, I remember that he always say this, as he attended retail conferences, that no one's never saying Amazon, people are giving hey, here's the future, this is this or this, but it's in the back of everyone's mind. It is kind of like you said, it's it can be the best part of your strategy, and it could also be the worst.
Yeah.
No one kind of creates problems or drives sales like they do.
Well, and also I think that there's kind of still that bias against Amazon by brands who are like, I want to build a brand, I don't want to build Amazon. And there's two places for that. There's two pieces to that. Is one, we went through the whole D2C wave, which I'm a big fan of D2C. I think it has a really strong role within a brand's portfolio, but I think it's important to define that role. I don't think it's always going to be the volume driver. But also you have to keep balancing in mind that Amazon's like your best friend and your worst enemy. So there's always that piece of not only what am I doing on Amazon, but also in the back of my mind, what am I doing elsewhere that I can use either as leverage in my annual vendor negotiations? Or how can I use Amazon to test products that I'm then going to bring, similar items to market elsewhere? I think the Amazon, the data provided and what you can access, it's the largest first party data repository in existence. So it's like you think about Google and Pixels and all that stuff. Use Amazon. It's not just a retailer. It's a CRM engine. It's an advertising engine. It's a user experience testing ground. It has that 1P data so you can better understand who your customers are and how are they shopping, as well as being, obviously a distribution network.
And like, it's like the shopping mall that has like the shortest feedback loop. Yeah. Where like, 4 product cycles can happen a year where like development, test the market.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little fast, but yeah.
But some brands I talk to, they're like, I want to be on Amazon. That's going to be my solution. I'm like, that's not your solution. Amazon also isn't the solution for everything. I talked to a brand that has a really strong D2C site. They're really overstocked, and they're like, hey, we're just going to put it on Amazon. You don't just put stuff on Amazon and expect it to like solve all your problems. Like you have to have the right infrastructure and support behind Amazon to make that happen. But now also Amazon's launching things like Buy with Prime, where you can still have your D2C site. Even it's going to be featured in Amazon search, but you can still have that kind of space. But I don't recommend just to any small little seller like, hey, yeah, go launch on Amazon, because it is a significant investment either on Amazon with traffic drivers or with social channels.
I saw a brand just like I've seen one that like I buy from that uses Buy with Prime, and I could see it totally makes sense. They're like this beverage company called Spilt, and brand new, and I think they did like that simultaneous launch where they did D2C and Amazon at the same time, and actually Buy with Prime. They're like, it's like, okay, if you couple it with the logistics, it's like,
yeah. I mean, one of the biggest barriers and impacts to conversion on D2C is the delivery time.
Yeah.
Also, if you have Buy with Prime, similar to Amazon Pay, you are tapping into the brand equity of the trust that consumers have in Amazon.
Well, I mean, I was already logged into Amazon, so like
seamless convenience.
I know, like I've bought from this brand 3 or 4 times, and I know that if I go to their D2C, it is actually the same experience as Amazon. Like I'm going to get through from end to end as fast, and I just do whatever like is convenient. I don't really think about it, but I have bought from the D2C, and I usually don't do that. I usually just go straight to Amazon. So that's an interesting, Buy with Prime.
Yeah, which is the behavior change. Yeah. And so when I think about like outcomes versus outputs, if one of the outcomes you want to drive is higher D2C sales, and that there needs to be a change in consumer behavior in order to get that, they drove a behavior change for you by adding Buy with Prime. Right. And now fundamentally your behavior has changed, which helps align to the output that they desired. That's like a great real world example of what can happen. But again, like brands need to be clear on what outcome they're trying to drive before. I think a lot of them are just like, okay, we just got to run advertising and we just got to do content. We just have to have social and influencer. But it's like, what are you really trying to accomplish? Taking a step back before making all those choices.
So these big picture outcomes that, you were just talking about kind of just like goes back to what we were talking about earlier about just like strategy, for someone that a brand that doesn't know how to like navigate like these new channels, like you kind of need strategy, need like a little bit of hand holding. So I guess ultimately, what are the conversations that you find are working to help these brands that you work with?
Yeah. So the way I work and the reason I do it is because my experience has been both kind of high-low. So I can kind of zoom out and see a strategy, but I've also done enough of the work that I know actually how to go and operationalize those plans. I think sometimes strategy can sound a little like fluffy, especially when it's coming from consulting, because so often it's seen as consultants are coming in and they're not understanding the business, understanding the organization, like think about McKinsey and Nike, right? And they just come in and put together a plan. But for me, I like to partner closely with brands over a longer period of time, like 3 to 6 months, whether it's like a fractional role or other type of retainer. And I meet with their team and I want to understand like, what are the pain points? What are they working on? Because so much of like the meat of what needs to happen is usually already there. And then it's just a matter of, okay, here are the things the team has identified. This is how we go and do it. Or here's like the next 3 months. This is what we need to do. Because the other thing I found with brands is that there's so much noise, right? It's kind of like everything everywhere all at once, it feels like. It's really tough to know, okay, these are my top 3 priorities. And then kind of giving the framework to say no to things.
And
yeah.
That sounds like running the business in this decade where like we're just drowning with information, suggestions, and you're like everything all at once.
Yeah.
And taking that down to like, no, these are the priorities. Start here.
Yes, absolutely.
Trust me, I need that hand holding in my business ventures. So
it's easier to do it for someone else. I struggle it for myself too, because there's so many shiny objects. I really have to focus on what's going to impact me now and what's going to like drive the most value. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah, totally. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for coming on and chatting and tell us about some of your experience. And if someone really gets a hold of you and just like learn, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm really active on LinkedIn. You can send me a message there, or there's also a link to book via Calendly.
Yeah. And your last name is Bab. So it's
Eabb. It's like boy, apple, boy. First name Hara, Kara. And then like, I'm sure we'll include a link, but you can set up 30 minutes and talk to me. Like I do coffee chats with other agencies or consultants. And then there's the option to do a free kind of brand overview to understand like what you need, what you're focusing on, what your challenges are, as like a free consultation. And then, there's also the option for kind of an hourly, like if you want just an hour of my brain, essentially, there's option for that too. But, if you're a brand that's between, $20 and $50 million in revenue, either you're already on Amazon and you want to expand elsewhere, or you're not on Amazon, you don't know if you should be, or you're on Amazon and Amazon's just breaking and you don't know why, reach out and I would love to talk to you.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, Kara. We'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for having me. Okay.
1, 2, 3.